Thank you all. Thank you all very, very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcoming we've gotten from every aspect of our visit has been absolutely wonderful. And it's a pleasure to be here in Africa. It's the first time my wife and I have ever been here, and it's the second to the last continent of our journeys over our lifetime. We only have one left, and that's Antarctica, and we may not get there. So what we're going to talk about today is this managing in an uncertain world. I think that's probably a very timely topic for almost any time, but it's certainly getting more and more timely as we speak. Let me talk about what I mean when I say that. Uncertainty is ubiquitous. Now that's a big word. I learned that someplace. Ubiquitous means it's all over. It's massive. It's spread. You can't go anywhere where it's not. Uncertainty is ubiquitous. On one side of our company, the outside, we have uncertainty designated by the global economy, the regional economies, local economies, regulations, taxes, tariffs, trade agreements. You know, in America, we are suffering with what are we going to do with health care, and it's in a state of evolution and change, employment levels and such. Lots of uncertainty, and if you think you can predict what's going to happen next year, think about we can't predict what's going to happen next week. It's a very uncertain outside our companies. Then inside our companies, the ability to forecast the needs of our customers, it varies. It's an impossible task to forecast exactly what they need. What's going to happen in the marketplaces? What's going to happen with our investment criteria? Inside our company, there's a great deal of variability, which is another word for uncertainty that says we're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but it's going to be different than we think. Forecasting is something that's almost impossible to the point where we don't even use the word too much anymore. We use demand planning. And what I'm going to talk about is how do we succeed with such uncertainty on both sides of our businesses. And I want to take from a fella named Phil Dolce that I've worked with many years. I met Phil first when he was working for a division of Newell Rubbermaid as a marketing brand owner of the Sharpie brand within the Sanford division of Newell Rubbermaid. It's a product that's about $1.5 billion, just that product. He became the champion for S&OP there. I got to know him very well when he left there and became the president of U.S. Playing Cards, a division of Jarden. The fellow right after me is going to speak. He's from Jarden, one of the divisions of Jarden. Phil then got elevated after U.S. Playing Cards to 5 divisions within Jarden and used S&OP in every single one of them. He's now with a company in Michigan called the Stowe Company, where he's CEO and part owner, and of course, he wouldn't be without. He said this: business leaders today have an ever-increasing amount of data at their fingertips. More and more data. We hear the term big data. More and more data and information. But when it comes to forecasting, anticipating the future, that data and the models that are derived from it provide an illusion of precision and control. I call that the perception of precision. Because we have lots of data doesn't mean we have lots of precision. We simply don't. He went on to say demand fluctuations are inherently unpredictable. So the key to success is not to try and predict the variability, but rather employ a strong process that manages through that uncertainty and variability, not trying to eliminate it. Let me tell you a little bit about my background before we get into that subject and what do we do about it, how do we manage through that uncertainty. I graduated from university in the mid-60s. People are probably doing a little quick arithmetic now and saying, this guy's pretty old. But I was an industrial engineer by education, but I had a military obligation. I served for 4 or 5 years in the military. And when I came out, I took a job with a large corporation which ended up in a function called a schedules coordinator. And it was 2 things I didn't do in that function. I didn't schedule and didn't coordinate, circa 1970. None of what we know today existed then. It was just beginning to be thought about. But that job told me that that's no way to run a business. And I was thinking that I had to go do something else for a living because that was no way, when I heard there was some people saying it didn't have to be that way. So through a little investigation, there was no books to read. You could just read maybe an article and talk to people. I left the big company where I was a small fish in a big pond, went to a smaller company and hired one of the people who were the advocates of the new approach, a guy named Oliver White. And by 1979, became what he termed one of his touted, revered Class A successes. And I left, if you will, that company to join Oliver White in 1981 because I was a little bit bored and said, what am I going to do next? And I joined Oliver White in 81, and he passed away in 1983. And so I've been doing this ever since, and I've worked with some of the best companies in the world, big and small, private and public, almost every industry that you can think of. And today what I call myself a coach. I used to call myself a consultant, but a consultant, the perception is that's somebody that's smarter than I am. They're going to come in and tell me how to run my business. I don't do that. I'm not that good. What I do is I have a notion and a framework for renewed thinking, a new approach, some of which we're going to share here today. And then I coach people who play the game. See, state of the art in this field is not with academics or consultants, it's with you, the practitioners. What we write about and what we accomplish is not what we do, it's what you do. And so what I consider myself today as a coach, I don't play the game, I help others play the game and facilitate that. I also teach and I do some writing. In that regard, I've written 6 books in this space with a guy named Tom Wallace, who is a fantastic writer. That partnership I've had with, that virtual partnership with Tom is a good one because he's a great writer, but I have all the scar tissue all over my back. And together, we've put together 6 books which are pretty damn prolific, and they've been translated into 7 languages throughout the world. I don't think there's any continent I can go on and don't find a book by their language. And as we said in the introduction, 3 of those books are used for APIC certification as well. Today, after doing some stint in editorial content, I've headed up I consider myself retired. Now, I define retired as doing what you want to do and less of what you don't want to do. When am I going to stop doing something? Probably never. Meaning, as long as I have air to breathe, I'll continue to do something. This field really still intrigues me, and I still enjoy it, and I still really like working with young people, and today everybody's young. Never used to be that way, but today everybody's young. So here's something to ponder. As my wife and I travel over here, there's so much going on in the world. It seems like the world is maybe upside down a little bit. We came over here with some cautions, and the problems were behind us, not in front of us. We learned about what's going on in South Africa, and along the way, there was a guy named Muhammad Ali in the last couple of weeks that died. Now, he was an international figure, an athlete. He was a boxer. He was a controversial figure in many ways, but he stood on principle. And he did things that really did make a difference. Listening to some of the eulogies about Muhammad Ali brought me to an understanding that this is a damn good thought. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. When I heard that, I said, my goodness, that's terribly applicable to myself right now. I'm finished, you see, making a living. My kids are long out of college, and we have great grandkids, and they're well into there. I never thought I'd have kids that old, but we do. But I'm finished making a living, I'm trying to make a difference. Now, making a living is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but I'm really trying to make a difference, and I hope these words here today and the things I do in the past and the future have made a difference, and that's my greatest hope. Now, returning to, now we have this one filled out with the variability side, with all the internal variability. But let's return to that thought and expand upon it a little bit. On one side of the business, we have uncertainty, and on the other side, we have the business inside, we have variability. Those are 2 of the same things. 2 words that mean the same thing. We don't know what the hell's going to happen, is what that says. The external uncertainty, we really just have to manage through that. We're going to talk a little bit about how that's done. What I did a number of years ago when I was with the IIF, the International Institute of Forecasters, I had lunch with a guy named David Orrell, who is one of their pillars. He teaches and works out of Oxford in England. One of the pillars of that organization. He spent his career doing modeling of global economics, weather, and medical prognosis based on data. Lots of data. And through the course of lunch, sharing our thoughts and experiences, he said, you know, you and I have come to the same place, but on far different routes. He said, I think we both would agree I wish I had said this. He said the aim of what each of us are doing is less to predict the future than to prepare for its inevitable variability. And boy, that's absolutely true. You can't eliminate it, you must deal with it. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The internal uncertainty we deal with in a little different fashion. This name probably doesn't ring a bell with any of you, Yogi Berra. How many people know that name? He's a baseball player. He's more famous for what he said after he retired than for ever playing the game of baseball. He was a kind of jovial guy, and he'd say things, the words sounded silly, but they became so meaningful. The most common, I think, is it ain't over till it's over. You know, that seems like a silly combination of words, but what he meant is don't finish the game before it's over. If you're ahead in the last minute of the game, don't give up. It ain't over. It ain't over till it's over. Well, he weighed in on this issue of forecasting as well. He says, I don't like forecasting, particularly when it deals with the future. He's right. Who likes forecasting? Because the only thing you can be when you try and forecast the future is wrong. It's not a science that you can say, let's get it right. You can't get it right. It's knowing how wrong is the range of possibility. The typical response that we have to uncertainty, it's a natural response, but it's very flawed, is this. We seek more detail further into the future. I've had companies that say, you know, our forecasting method leaves a lot to be desired. We now do it monthly by families. Let's start doing it weekly in granular detail, and we'll be better off. You know what you do? You take all the demand people and pull them in to do all this, and they stop selling. You make a bad situation worse. You're not going to get better information by looking for more detail further out. It is not at all profound to say the further into the future you look, the blue line, the accuracy of what you're going to see becomes less, diminished, in a parabolic, almost exponential form. And the uncertainty is the other. The further out you go, it becomes parabolic, increasing uncertainty and less precision. Let me put that in a different context. What I call a suicide quadrant. On this chart, the horizontal represents the horizon of the future, time. The vertical represents the detail within which you're going to do that work of forecasting or anticipating the future. In the book Sales Forecasting, which is the first one I wrote, 2001, we put forth the notion of this suicide quadrant. It said, when you get the intersect of worst possible worlds, maximum detail, long into the future, what do you end up with? The suicide quadrant. That line in the middle is the planning time fence, called the cumulative lead time of making and shipping and delivering the product. When you're trying to maximum detail in that long horizon, you can't survive that. All you do is get wrapped around the axle with lots of detail and get confused. It doesn't help. You got to get the hell out of the suicide quadrant and into the aggregate-only quadrant with the ability to anticipate the resource or supply requirements to satisfy demands based on some heuristics, some simplifying assumptions about the future based on aggregate family-based predictions with no granularity. That gets you out of the suicide quadrant. That's an imperative. Now, we also got to be working on how do we get out of forecasting at the detail level inside that cumulative lead time? And the way you do that is learn how to build to order. Postpone the variation in the option so you can package it at the last possible moment. But the best method to improve forecasting practice is to do less of it. And that's what that chart is saying. You got to get the heck out of the suicide quadrant and do things differently to be better. You can't just say we're going to forecast more accurately. Matter of fact, when Tom and I wrote that first book, Sales Forecasting, A New Approach, we said we will never use the word accuracy and forecasting in the same sentence because it's an oxymoron. It doesn't make any sense. The second thing we do, facing uncertainty, natural but flawed, is we hunker down and try and preserve self-preservation. Let's just survive. Let me give you this visualization. Any company has three constituents. Now, a constituency is somebody who makes a contribution and benefits from. And there are three of them relative to a manufacturing organization. One is the owners. They put up the capital and the investment. What do they expect back from it? Benefit, income on their investment. Customers. They say, I create a need that you're going to satisfy, and I'll pay you well for that, and I'll help you with the design and such of that product. So the customers are a second. And the third, of course, is all of us, the people who work. Now, that employee term can be the suppliers as well, the outside, not just the direct employees, but the indirect, the third party, if you will. It can also be the community, the country, the planet. That's their benefits. They contribute to and are recipients of benefits. Now, the natural force of these three constituents is centrifugal, like a centrifuge. They spin apart. The natural force is it will spin apart. When faced with uncertainty, the speed of that centrifuge increases. And we start hunkering down and saying, let's protect one at the expense of another. When you are trading off one constituency for another in the benefits received, you're on a slippery slope of disengagement. That's the slippery slope of non-existence. You will be gone. You must satisfy all constituencies. In the short term, you may have to make temporary trade-offs, but if that's your long-term strategy, it's over. Can't do it. You can't sustain unless you satisfy all constituents. The force we need is not centrifugal with an F, but centripetal, if you will, where we draw these together. And that gravitational force, that center of gravity, is what I want to talk about as well. See, that hunkered down approach, let's just serve one, not all constituencies, is a slippery slope. You can't get there. It's natural, but it's very flawed. Let me give you some priorities of this managing in the uncertain world. First priority, get on the same page. See, every company has capabilities as they exist. What's our flexibility to change, to roll, to configure to order? What's our flexibility as we see it now, both in labor and equipment? What's our response time? How quickly can we change direction? What is our agility or flexibility? And now that they're also faced, that side, with the constraints. We have certain limitations in working capital and financial reports and performances, obsolescence. We have lots of constraints and we have capabilities. What we're trying to do through getting on the same page is get everybody understanding what's the ugly truth and what can we do about it within the financial constraints that we're faced with. We're trying to maximize the ability to react to an uncertain world within the financial constraints that we can tolerate. And you can't do that one discipline at a time. The financial person can't do that without the operations, without the sales and marketing, without the technology. It's got to be a collaborative, consensus-building effort to get everybody on the same page. When you put these kind of issues on the table, if you take the four disciplines that I just mentioned, the demand, the supply, the financial, the fiduciary responsibility, and the future innovation, the new product people, and you face them with that discussion, will you end up with disagreement? Not only about what is, but what can be. And the answer is, you bet your life. These people will disagree strongly. I had one president, it wasn't Phil, it was another one. He said, if I have the people that represent these four areas coming to me all with the same story, never a disagreement, I don't need three of them. Because somebody's running the place, because they can't have the same opinion. They're supposed to see the world through a different lens. That disagreement and the reconciliation of that disagreement is at the heart of success in managing uncertainty. You need a process that's going to raise disagreement so that it can be reconciled from disagreement to reconciling the disagreement to prevent lasting conflict and agree upon what are we collectively and collaboratively going to do, and we'll all put our energies towards the same direction. When that reconciliation requires fiscal, fiduciary type responsibility, our ability to perform, or customer service, and those four people don't perfectly agree, it's not a democracy. You don't take a vote and 3 out of 4 wins. No, everybody has an opinion. It's like ears. Everybody has a couple of opinions. It's how do you decide when you have people disagreeing? You require a president. See, running a business is not a democracy. There is a hierarchy of decision making, and the president must be involved in this reconciliation of understanding what the constraints are and what the issues that you're capable of doing or not capable of doing or wish to do or want to do or can't do or won't do. That involves everyone through and including the president. What we call that in one of our books is called the ugly moose. You see, an ugly moose, that's a big animal. Now, lots of parts of the world don't have moose, but in North America, up north in the cold, they have this moose. And it's a big animal. It's ugly. That thing around his head is not antlers, it's flesh, and it molts once a year, so it falls down and bloody mess, and it goes away, and he grows another one. That thing weighs about 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. I don't know what the hell that is in kilos, but it's 1,000 to 2,000 kilos, somewhere in that range. It's huge. And I'm convinced it's the animal God put together after he finished everything else with all the leftover parts. Because it doesn't fit. Its head is bigger than its butt, and it shouldn't be that way. But you see, every company has this big ugly moose, this big ugly animal. You know, I was in Australia presenting, and that's why I began to get a picture. They said, you should have used the platypus. I went to China, and they didn't have an alternative to the moose, but they didn't know moose. So it's a big ugly animal, it's a beast. Every company has them. They're usually difficult and contentious issues, but they're under the table in the conference room. You can smell its breath, you can hear its heartbeat, it's there. Everybody knows it, but we don't talk about it because it's difficult and it's contentious. We've spent a lot of time arguing about it and never gotten to resolution. Good companies, the best of the best, know how to disagree without being disagreeable. That says, I disagree with you, and here's why. You see, a disagreement that starts out, I'm right and you're wrong, and I'll tell you why. You know, that conversation is going nowhere. That's not going to get there. You say, I don't see it the same way, and let me tell you why. And I want to hear what yours is. It's through that discussion with positive energy, not negative, not finger pointing or accusatory, but positive energy that you get to an agreement that's the best by getting everybody's point of view. And again, it's not a vote, it's not a democracy, but everybody needs to participate in a collaborative way so that you can make a decision that everybody will contribute to and can buy into. Good companies learn how to thrive on this conflict and this disagreement to prevent chaos. If you don't resolve disagreement and conflict, you will have chaos. Because everybody's running in a different direction, pulling the rope in a different direction, colliding with one another, and that doesn't work very well. The moose is simply a symbol that says we have to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. Getting the moose on the table, not under the table, is what we refer to by the ugly moose. Conflict resolution. On the bottom of this, you see it in quotes. That's the name of a book. It was written by a guy named Stuart Levine, paralleled after a book written by a guy named Roger Covey called Getting to Yes, Dealing with Negotiating. So getting to resolution. I got in touch with Stuart through a common colleague, and we began to dialogue about what he was doing and what he was thinking. Now, does anybody know what that JD on the end of his name stands for? JD? It's Juris Doctorate. Do you know what that means? He's a lawyer. He's a doctorate of the law. Jury. Doctorate. He's a lawyer. But he doesn't call himself a lawyer anymore. He teaches in the University of California Law School at Berkeley. He teaches conflict resolution. But he doesn't practice law anymore. He practiced law for about 12 years after he graduated JD. But then he said, I came to realize that lawyers don't resolve conflict, they create it. So he doesn't practice law. But he specializes in conflict resolution. The book deals with a framework. I read the book, we collaborated, and we worked with a couple of companies to really learn how to blend two bodies of knowledge, this whole S&OP that raises conflict, and his framework that says, now how do we resolve it with harmonious solutions? Stuart taught me a great deal. This is one of the most powerful. The disagreement has two parts. As to the substantive issue over which you're disagreeing, inventory is too high. Service is too low. We have a disagreement on what to do about that. That's the substantive issue. But there's an emotion behind every substantive issue on all sides. Unless you get the emotion on the table with the substantive issue, you only solve it temporarily and not completely. It will come back later as a different color, a different flavor, in a different time. You must deal with resolving conflict by dealing with both issues, the substantive part of the discussion, but the emotion behind it. Disagreement temporarily gets resolved, but becomes conflict when you do it with only part of that. That's a problem. You have to solve disagreement thoroughly and fully, and everybody has to have a chance to have their say in a constructive way, raising positive, not negative energy. Lasting conflict must deal with both parts of that disagreement. Doing that effectively, this is my conclusion, can be learned. Stewart has a framework by which he works with people to do that, to learn how through his framework to do that. But what I found after working with several companies who use his framework, I found that every company has some means of doing that, a framework. The one that Stewart has is only one of many, many, many. What I really believe, that a company with a will, a motive, will find a way, a framework, to come to resolving that issues. And we call that the culture. It's how people work together to resolve disagreement. That's the culture of an organization, those relationships. And a company that says, we are going to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable, and it's going to become part of our shtick, part of our existence, they will find a way to do it. Where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's a motive, they'll find a framework. Now, sometimes you need a little help with the framework, but companies that are well motivated will do that. It's not an issue. But they have to understand what's the objective and why. We're trying to raise and resolve conflict and disagreement to align human energy. That's what we're trying to accomplish. I came across this statement a few months ago. It said, conflict is the root of all waste. I hadn't heard it phrased that way before. It was incredible. And it was done, I was reading an article by AME, which is the Association of Manufacturing Excellence, which is the lean people. The lean people are saying conflict is the root of all waste. I'm saying, oh my God, that's terrific. You know, they've been dealing with waste and waste elimination their whole existence. But now they're understanding that conflict, disagreement, is at the root of that. And they went on to say, we must learn how to identify and address the common culprits of conflict that manifest themselves in waste. Oh my goodness. You know, it's amazing. The more you learn, the more things start to converge and overlap. There's a huge overlap between the Six Sigma methodologies and what S&OP and what all this conflict resolution, or how do we run a business through uncertainty. There's a huge overlap and convergence that takes place, and that's only a demonstration of that. Let me go to priority 2. Priority 2 is simplify. That's not easy to do in the light of the massive data and information. We have a fog of confusion that blurs sometimes our ability to see simplicity. More information is not always good. Sometimes less is more. We have to learn how to simplify. The plethora, that's a lot of it. Data has us seeing trees, not the forest. We need to make sure that we're looking at the forest, not just the trees. We secondly have to understand the perception of precision that comes from the modeling efforts from that plethora of data is not where we want to be. What we need is not demand models that are perfect. As David Orrell said, our job is not to predict the future perfectly, but it's to prepare for its inevitable variability. Demand models need only be as accurate or precise as our tolerance window and financial constraints require. We have to get that collaborative consensus. What are those tolerance windows? What are those constraints? And get a collaborative consensus build through line authority, but by participation, so that we know what they are. Then we can determine, what do we want to do? What will we do? What do we not want to do because of risk? And what will we not do? What do we don't want to do and what we not do? That comes from a discussion. That's the second priority, is don't get lost in the plethora of data. Don't get confused. Don't perceive that more information, more data is always better answers. It may or may not be. I don't want to diminish in any way the analytics that are going on today that are huge and magnificent. But you know what analytics are like? They're like a set of golf clubs. They're tools to help you do the job. The tools don't make the job. People do. You see, forecasting, demand anticipation, analysis, trade-offs, all of those things are human decisions with imperfect information. No matter how much you get, it's still imperfect. That's the ubiquitous nature of uncertainty. You can't eliminate it. The fog of uncertainty can diminish our ability to see simple solutions. Don't let that happen. So simplicity is the priority number 2. The ultimate sophistication is simplicity. Don't forget that. I learned that very early in my career from that guy Oliver White that I hired back in the 70s to help me be successful. That's one of the things that he kept for me. He could always see through the fog of uncertainty and confusion and see the real issue and principle and pull it out and say, here it is. That's what we're trying to do with simplicity. Look through the fog of complexity, see the issue, pull it out so that everybody can see it, and then deal with it and get a collaborative consensus of what you're going to do about it. Now, the third priority is engage. In these troubled waters in which we all live, what you have to do is get everybody rowing the boat or the raft. You got to get everybody doing their part. It's got to be in a coordinated, collaborative kind of way. You have to engage people. The establishment of a collaborative, consensus-building process is essential in this environment. And what we're trying to do is create a defined and disciplined process whereby we can gain that collaborative consensus and align human energies to get everybody engaging in a constructive and productive way. Goal is to understand the tolerance windows, and that requires collaborative consensus building across the entire supply chain, not just inside our own building, but with our suppliers, with our distribution and third-party providers, and with our customers. But we must understand that window of all of them. What are the constraints? And what can we do? And what will we do? What can't we do? And what do we not want to do? That must be built. Succeeding in uncertain markets, taking that initial quote that Phil made, this is Phil again up top, adding to that what he went on to say in that same interview, the most effective process to manage that and to get everybody engaged is the executive component to S&OP. But it must be embraced across the entire organization, not just part of it. He went on to say, moreover, the best practices with eS&OP are counterintuitive. And I might add, they're counter-experiential. They're not what you do, and they're not what you think you should do. That makes it difficult and uncomfortable. There are things within the framework of it that are not intuitive, such as operating with less detail, not more detail. That's part of it, but there are many, many others. The operating profits, the benefits are operating profit increase, working capital reduction, increased service, more than worth it. Doing it properly brings on hard benefits of quantum improvement, double digits improvement. You don't improve inventory turns from 10 to 10.6, you go from 10 to 30. And you know, one CEO said to me one time, I'm beginning to understand why we cannot make a 5% sustainable improvement in anything. He said, because if you're only looking for 5%, what you do is you do what you do better, you work harder. But if we say we got to make a 50% or 100% improvement, double, now you can't do that by just working harder. You got to do things differently. And if you do it differently to get that benefit, it will sustain. So you can make a sustainable 50% improvement, but you cannot make a sustainable 5% improvement. How counterintuitive is that? That's what he's talking about. The process of which we talk is a building process. You see, it's a step process. It's chronologically stepped. It says, let's see where we are. Close the month. Now let's look at the demand side in that stovepipe. Let's look at the supply side in that stovepipe, based on change and implications and what's happened that we didn't plan on. And then we get together at step 4 and begin to build a collaborative consensus at the doer level. And if the consensus is within the framework of existing policies, strategies, and financial responsibilities, you make decisions there. Where you cannot make decisions that you need to make within the framework of all of those things, It must go to the executive, the president, and staff. Or, if you don't gain a collaborative consensus, anybody has the right of appeal. But that process, if you will, gets you to one game plan that everybody contributes to and buys into and is held accountable for. That's aligning human energy through a collaborative, inclusive process. But again, we're not talking democracy here. We're talking that's the process by which you gain that collaborative consensus. Keep involved. The new product people are involved in every step. That's the innovation people, financial people in every step. And it goes on every single month. Why? Because stuff happens. Nothing is constant. You got to do this every month, and you must do it net change. And what it gives you is a discipline and a rhythm to dealing with the uncertainty in a very defined and disciplined way. The real challenge with this is not the logic of what we speak here. That's simple. The arithmetic. There's no algorithms, there's no fancy math, there's no obscure data. It's not blurred by the fog of plethora of data. It's simple. It's real simple. The problem is not the logic. The hard part is the culture of the behavior change. Now, I define culture as how people work together, how they resolve problems. The sum of all of those is the culture. The sum of those relationships is the culture. That's the hard part. In order to affect that, leadership must immerse themselves in the improving of the process. Without it, it shall not happen. I have the what I call the success rule today, and I got this from Laura Cesare. She talked yesterday at the conference, and in 2010 I sat in one of her sessions as well, and I heard her say this, and I've used this ever since. The 60-30-10 rule. I don't think she called it that, but I call it the success rule today. Those that succeed exceedingly well in managing through this uncertainty that's ubiquitous, 60% of the result is because of behavior change. Doing things differently, cultural change. 30% is because we define the process. How do we deal with one another? When do we deal with one another? What's the timing, that 5-step process? It's process definition and then discipline to that process. That's 30% of what makes for success. The last part is technology. I like to say, it's like playing a game of golf or tennis. You need an instrument. You need golf clubs or tennis. But I'll guarantee you, and I can prove it, in both of those games, the tools don't make for the player. I have pretty good golf clubs, but I don't play very well. I've got a tennis racket, and I play better tennis than golf, but I still have a lot to go. It's not the tennis racket that helps me. It's how I use the tennis racket. So that's what we're talking about is behavior change and culture change. That's the hard part. If you're going to do this, you must get a collaborative process for dealing with uncertainty in this ubiquitous nature. You must have full cross-functional buy-in. That's all disciplines. You can't say, we'll do this without the sales and marketing people. No, you won't. We'll do this without the financial. They'll be over there doing their own thing financially, disconnected from the reality of today. No, you won't. You must get a uniform, unanimous consent of all functions. This makes sense, and we're going to define how we do it. Now, is there a cookie cutter that says, here's the only? No. It's a process, it's a set of concepts, it's a set of principles. If followed, they work every time. But you must have everybody in the wagon. You must have everybody making sure they contribute. Now, it is counter-experiential, and it's counterintuitive, and what that begets is discomfort. It's uncomfortable. Change of any type is uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable to make this kind of change. How do we get a process that will manage through this massive uncertainty we will constantly forever face? In order to pursue in a meaningful way, you must make sure you proceed on a path of low risk. Because you're not going to bet somebody's career that says, if this doesn't work the first time, your career's done, or you're not going to bet your company. So you must, if you will, mitigate risk. Here are the keys to managing through the uncertainty we face. First, simplify. Put that at the top of your list. If you say, we are complex and we can't get rid of complexity, you won't. You will make it even more complex with that mindset. You say, we are complex, everyone is, but we're going to see through the fog of complexity and see the simplification. Second, maximize flexibility or agility. Be fast on your feet. You got to be willing to move and change. Muhammad Ali might be a good example of that. Engage the entire organization. Leave nobody behind. Make sure you get everybody with a contribution and an input to the decisions that get made. So collaborate and engage. Up and down the supply chain, as well as inside your own walls, your customers, your suppliers, engage across that supply chain. Understand not only your constraints, but find out what the constraints of others are, your suppliers and your customers and the distributors. Understand their constraints. And most of all, be transparent, especially about assumptions you're going to make about either circumstances or means to solve those circumstances. Key takeaways I'd like you to come from this discussion. First, accept that uncertainty and variability is inherent and it's uncontrollable. No matter how hard you try, you cannot get rid of uncertainty and variability. It won't happen. There's a lot of mathematics out there that will help build models. David Orrell is among the best. But you can't get rid of uncertainty and variability. Next, eS&OP, the executive component of managing the supply chain, will help you manage through that uncertainty and variability by first engaging all stakeholders inside your enterprise and then up and down the supply chain. Without such a defined, disciplined process, you'll never align all the energies necessary to deal with that uncertainty. Align human energy by involving and resolving conflict, disagreement. Not only is uncertainty and variability intrinsic, so is disagreement. In any manufacturing company, the environment must be, it's not only okay to disagree, it's mandatory that you disagree. Not arbitrarily, but on substance. You must say, I don't see it the same way. It's from that disagreement that you will get aligned human energy and proper resolution. If you align human energy, in my opinion, an organization could do anything, things that were not before possible. You can do whatever you say you're going to do as long as you get. Now, that doesn't mean you say yes to everything. You know, a company that says we'll say yes to every opportunity is a company that's not going to be around, because you've got to understand what your constraints truly are and manage within them. So sometimes saying no is the right answer. You know, you don't want to say no more often than not, that's for sure. But you got to make sure that you're saying yes only when you can mean yes. If we come back to the center of gravity on this centrifuge that we talked about just a little earlier, what we're trying to create is this centripetal force, not the centrifugal force, but bring things together, not let them spin apart. I truly believe, but I'm biased, is that the principles and concepts of this thing called executive sales and operations planning is the center of gravity, which will bring that all together. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to end by wishing you good luck. But I want to define that word luck. It's when preparation meets opportunity. I had a high school coach. When I was in high school, I was not a great athlete, but I was an okay athlete. A high school coach told me what luck is when preparation, and I've remembered it ever since. You see, he said, opportunities is not something you control. They come along. You got to get yourself in the right place at the right time. An opportunity presents itself. You can't do much about that. But the other part of that, you can, preparation. If you don't practice well, if you don't prepare well, you're not ready when the opportunity presents itself. Your part is to do the preparation. If you do the preparation, the opportunity will come, and when it comes, you will seize it. And you call it getting lucky. In my career, I've been really lucky. I work my buns off to do what I can to be leading edge, to do things that are forethought. And the opportunities come along. There's another athlete in America, a guy named Lou Gehrig, and at his retirement, he said, I'm the luckiest man in the world. He was in Yankee Stadium, and it echoed, I'm the luckiest man in the world. Well, I kind of feel that way. And you can be lucky too, but you better be prepared. If you don't have eS&OP, the executive component of S&OP, in your pocket and understood, when the opportunity in the organization you're in comes along to say we want to do something to get a better collaborative consensus-building mechanism to manage in this ubiquitous uncertainty, if you're not prepared, that opportunity when it presents itself will go unfulfilled. Your job is to prepare. If you don't know enough about eS&OP today, learn it. That doesn't mean you can go back as an individual and say, let's make this happen to the company, because you need unanimous buy-in. by all disciplines at the leadership level to say we're going to do it, and we're going to do it well at the best practice level. So you can't do it unilaterally, but you better be prepared if the opportunity presents itself to seize it. That's the part. So with that, I'd like to say, hey, thanks for listening. I want to wish you the good luck and the best wishes, safe travel, and most of all, the invitation for us to come here to this great place, visit with its people, and learn what's going on. It's unbelievable. We really enjoy our visit. We got more to come. We're staying for another week or so, and we enjoy being here. Thank you all very much for being here and for the invitation.